We're back looking at the economy today.
Yeah.
So, great.
I wanted to ask you guys a question. There's often a correlation between our faith and the way we spend our money. Do you find that people of faith maybe spend their money or invest their money differently? And a government that maybe suggested they go on a faith route, will it change the way they spend our money? How does faith play into that?
It's a great question. On the question of people of faith and their priorities with their disposable income, there's just an overwhelming body of evidence of higher levels of philanthropy, higher levels of charitable giving. The correlation between faith and charity is well established and significant. As for how a faith model would change the way we think about government, it seems to me we ought to be cognizant of the limits that we can impose on government. You asked earlier about the extent to which there's a growing distrust in government. One of the problems, I think, is a tendency on the part of politicians to overstate the way that they can affect society, affect the economy.
Overpromise, maybe?
Exactly. Government doesn't run the economy. No one runs the economy. Individual decisions made by millions of people are ultimately what the economy is all about. Governments create a framework in which individuals are making those choices. It can make big mistakes and it could disrupt things. But the tendency to overstate its capacity to manage or run or create jobs, all of the words that we've grown accustomed to hearing from politicians, is overstated. And so I think the best thing that we can do is to create the conditions for people to live out their lives in their homes and in the economy, rather than imposing trying to impose order on something that is disorderly and rightly so.
Let's pick up on that idea that it's millions of little decisions affect our economy, what I do with my life. Brian, bring us an example from history of an individual decision that actually rippled and affected the economy. Does it go that far back for people of faith?
Yeah, absolutely. People are always acting out of their deepest convictions, right? And this is why when we think of economics, most people think faith has nothing to do with it. And we don't really think about faith when we're buying a loaf of bread, even though we pray for daily bread, right? But what's interesting is economists always talk about this thing about maximizing utility. And ultimately that means, what's the goal? Why are people doing what they do? Why are they spending the way they do? When you're asking those questions, you're asking, what's fueling people? What purpose are you striving for? And faith, that's ultimately a religious question. And there's a great story I constantly love to tell. The very fact that we have a free market it comes out of the sort of long tradition in the West, and Christianity is a large part of shaping that. And in Canada, there's a beautiful story of a fellow named Alphonse Desjardins. And most people know the Desjardins credit union system. It's quite,
the green,
if you've ever been, the green, you know it. And what most people don't know, though, is it was started by people who did it because of their Catholic faith. They saw people who were being charged too much interest for their loans. They were short cash. They couldn't make ends meet or buy bread. And so he said, well, what we need to do together is pool our money together and offer lower cost loans. And that was the beginning of the Desjardins Credit Union in Canada. And that type of model sort of rippled across the country, and is, I think, just one example of how what seems like a plain sort of material, this worldly decision is actually shaped by bigger transcendent questions.
So let's talk those many moral decisions then. Sean, they affect the economy. At the Prime Minister's office where you work, that kind of analysis is understood. Give us an example of moral decisions affecting economy.
It's such a great question. There's a tendency to think of our economy in isolation. And of course, as Brian and I have talked about at some length in the past, it really rests on a foundation that oftentimes we don't see, but that is critical for its proper functioning, in large part all because it's ultimately all about trust. It rests on a foundation of families. It rests on a foundation of faith. It rests on a foundation of liberal arts, education. And if we fail to recognize that it relies on those foundations for its success, the risk, of course, is that we let those foundations erode without thinking about the broader implications. You know, Irving Kristol, the great American scholar, famously wrote a book in 1978 called 2 Cheers for Capitalism. He didn't think capitalism deserved 3 cheers.
That's right.
Because capitalism was a way to think about how we allocate scarce resources, but it wasn't an ethos. What was more important was the foundation that it rested upon. And I think that's part of the conversation that too often is ignored when we're talking about dollars and cents in isolation. We really do need to understand that it rests upon this powerful ecosystem of faith, family, and the liberal arts.
Love and care for your family, your neighbor, being honest, being good. These are foundational building blocks in the economy.
Exactly.
Okay, phenomenal. Thank you both for joining us today on our nation building panel on the economy. And boy, we're going to follow up with a conclusion on that. But Sean Speer with the McDonald Institute, Brian Dijkema of Cardis, thank you both so very much. We'll be back right after this.